My name is Olivia Reed, and I am 29 years old. If you have ever had a boss who smiles in meetings while quietly making sure everyone else knows you are the one who needs to step up, then you already understand the particular flavor of exhaustion I was carrying when my family decided we needed an unplanned escape to the cabin. It was my mother's idea, the way most family decisions happened in our house. She called on a random Tuesday and said the city was wearing us all down and we should just go. My father agreed without asking questions. My sister Brooke packed her bag like she had been waiting for the invitation. Even my cousin Tyler showed up with his truck, and a cooler acting like this was a tradition instead of something my mother had invented 2 days earlier. I said yes, because fighting it had never been worth the guilt that followed. We had only been at the cabin for a couple of hours when everything started to unravel. I was in the small kitchen helping my mother unpack the groceries we had bought in town. The old wooden counter was already covered with paper bags and the smell of pine cleaner. My work phone sat face up on the counter because I had been checking one last email before I forced myself to turn it off. I hit the speaker button without thinking when it rang, assuming it was someone from the office with a quick question. I kept unloading apples and bread while the call connected. Victor Langford's voice came through the tiny speaker, smooth and sharp at the same time. Olivia, I noticed the Henderson notes still aren't in the shared drive. Rachel and I were just going over your file. Some people seem to believe they can vanish for a long weekend without anyone noticing. That kind of attitude creates problems for the rest of the team. I froze with a carton of eggs in my hand. My mother stopped rinsing a bowl. In the living room, my father and Brooke went quiet. Tyler, who had been stacking firewood by the front door, turned his head. Victor kept talking, like he had no idea the whole cabin could hear him. Rachel pulled up that old email thread from last year, he continued. The one where you asked for personal time and mentioned some family complications. Interesting details in there. If certain parts of that conversation made their way to the wrong people, it could complicate things for you. You might want to remember who actually controls the narrative around here before you decide to check out again. Call me when you're back in the real world. The line went dead. The only sound left was the low hum of the old refrigerator and the faint creak of the cabin floorboards. My mother turned slowly, her expression already shifting into the worried, slightly disappointed look she had perfected over the years. Olivia, what was that? What old thread is he talking about? What family complications did you tell HR about? I set the eggs down carefully and forced the kind of laugh that tasted metallic. Just my boss being dramatic. He likes to remind people he's in charge. It's nothing, but it was already something. The controlled story Victor had built about me, the generous, reliable team player who stayed late and never complained, had just been broadcast across my family's quiet weekend escape. My father appeared in the doorway, frowning. Brooke followed right behind him, phone still in her hand, like she had been about to text someone. Tyler stayed near the woodpile, watching me with quiet curiosity instead of judgment. My mother pressed again. He mentioned family details. You know how your father and I feel about airing private things at work. I could feel the old familiar pressure settling over the room. The same pressure that had always made me downplay any success or struggle, so no one would worry or ask for more than I could give. I had been generous with my time at work for years, staying late to fix Victor's presentations, covering when he missed deadlines, never taking credit, because it had seemed easier than fighting. Now that same generosity was being used against me like a weapon. I stepped out onto the narrow back porch to get air that didn't feel like it belonged to Victor Langford. The lake was calm in the late afternoon light, the water reflecting the tall pines. I pulled my personal phone from my pocket and opened the old email thread I hadn't looked at in over a year. Rachel Klein from HR had forwarded it to Victor 3 days ago with a short note. Thought you should see this before the next review cycle. The thread contained my request for a personal day and a couple of sentences I had written in a moment of exhaustion about needing space from family expectations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that should have been shared, except Victor now had it. And he was letting me know he could use it. I was still staring at the screen when Tyler came out carrying an armful of split logs. He set them down by the porch rail without saying anything at first. Then he spoke in that low, steady way he had. That didn't sound like a normal work call. "You okay?" I almost gave him the same automatic answer I had given my mother. Instead, I heard myself say, "My boss just reminded me that he has access to things I wrote when I thought I was talking to HR in confidence. And he made sure my whole family heard it." Tyler nodded once like he was filing the information away. "Sounds like the kind of man who likes to keep people off balance. You don't have to explain it to me, but if you need someone to run interference with the rest of them in there, I can do that." I managed a small, bitter smile. "Thanks. I might take you up on that later." He went back inside, leaving me with the quiet and the weight of what had just happened. I walked down the short path toward the water phone still in my hand. Halfway there, I noticed an old cardboard box sitting on the bench near the fire pit. It looked like something my parents had pulled out of the storage shed earlier. Curiosity and the need to do something with my hands made me open it. Inside were old photo albums and loose pictures from years ago. One caught my eye immediately, a faded color print of me at maybe 10 years old, standing between my parents in front of this same cabin. On the back, in my grandmother's careful handwriting, was a short message I had never seen before. "Remember the truth we agreed to keep. Some stories protect more than they hurt." I read it twice. The words sat heavy in my chest. I had spent most of my adult life carefully managing what my family knew about my work and my finances, telling them I was doing fine, but never letting them see the promotions or the bonuses. I had told myself it was to protect them from worry. Now standing at the edge of the lake with Victor's voice still echoing in my head and my grandmother's note in my hand, I wondered how much of that protection had actually been me disappearing inside a story someone else had written. Back in the cabin, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Maya Ellison, the one colleague I still trusted. She had only sent 2 lines. "Rachel forwarded something to Victor this morning. You need to see the full thread. Call me when you can." I looked out at the water, then back toward the warm lights of the cabin where my family was waiting with questions I didn't want to answer. The weekend that was supposed to be an escape had already turned into something else entirely. Victor Langford had reached across the miles and reminded me that generosity, the kind I had offered so freely at work, could be turned into leverage the moment someone decided you were no longer useful. I slipped the old photograph into my jacket pocket and walked back inside. The air felt different now, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. My mother glanced up from the stove. My father was pretending to read a magazine. Brooke was scrolling on her phone, but watching me from the corner of her eye. Tyler gave me the smallest nod from the corner. I set my work phone face down on the counter and forced my voice to stay even. "Dinner smells good. I'm going to take a quick walk before we eat." No one stopped me, but as I stepped back out into the cooling evening, I already knew the walk wouldn't be long enough to outrun what had started. Victor had made the first move. The controlled story he liked to tell about me was beginning to crack, and I was standing in the middle of the cabin with the pieces in my hands, and no idea yet how far they would scatter. I walked farther along the narrow path that hugged the edge of the lake, the old photograph still in my jacket pocket, like it weighed more than it should. The water was dark now, the last light slipping behind the trees. Victor's voice from the speaker call kept replaying in my head, smooth and certain, the way it always sounded when he reminded people who held the power. He had taken the one time I had been honest with HR about needing space and turned it into a threat. He had also taken every late night I had stayed to fix his slides, every time I had covered for him when he dropped the ball, and he was using all of it like a leash. I stopped near a fallen log and pulled out my personal phone. Maya Ellison had worked with me long enough to know when something was off. I typed quickly. You said Rachel forwarded the thread. How bad is it? Her reply came fast. Bad enough. Victor asked her to pull anything that showed you struggling with boundaries. The old email is in there, plus a couple of notes you sent about needing time for family stuff. He's framing it like you're unreliable. I saved screenshots before it disappears. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The generosity I had offered so freely, the extra projects, the weekend emails I answered, so he could look prepared on Monday, had become the exact thing he was twisting. He didn't need to fire me. He just needed me to believe I couldn't afford to push back. When I walked back inside, dinner was already on the table. My mother had made the simple pasta she always did at the cabin, the kind that tasted like childhood, but never quite filled the quiet spaces. My father sat at the head, my sister Brooke across from him, and Tyler had taken the seat at the far end like he was trying to give me room. My mother looked up the second I closed the door. You were gone a while, she said, not quite a question. Everything all right with work? I sat down and reached for the salad bowl like the question was normal. It's handled for now. Brooke set her fork down with a small clink that felt louder than it was. That boss of yours sounded pretty intense on the speaker. He mentioned family stuff. You never really talk about work with us. Is there something we should know? The old pattern was already starting, the gentle pressure dressed up as concern. I took a slow bite of pasta and kept my voice even. He likes to remind people he's in charge. That's all it was. My father cleared his throat. Still, if he's digging into private emails, that's not right. But maybe you gave him a reason to look. You've always been private about things. The words landed exactly where he probably didn't mean them to. I felt the familiar sting under my ribs, the one that came from being the daughter who was supposed to be open, but had learned early that openness got turned into obligations. Tyler passed me the bread without saying anything, but the look he gave me was steady. He didn't push. After dinner, I helped clear the table while my mother washed dishes. The cabin was small enough that conversations carried. I could hear my father and Brooke talking in the living room about how young people these days expected too much flexibility from jobs. The sarcasm in my own head was bitter and automatic. Victor would have loved that line. He had built his entire management style on the idea that loyalty meant never having a life outside the office, and I had spent years proving him right by being the one who always said yes. When the kitchen was quiet again, I pulled the old photograph from my pocket and set it on the counter. The handwriting on the back was faded, but still clear. My grandmother had written it years ago, probably during one of the summers we spent here. Remember the truth we agreed to keep. Some stories protect more than they hurt. I had never seen it before. I turned the photo over and studied the image of myself at 10, standing between my parents with the same lake behind us. We looked happy. We looked like the kind of family that told clean stories about hard work and starting from nothing. But the note suggested something had been edited out. I thought about all the times my parents had talked about building everything themselves, about how there had never been extra money or safety nets. I had believed it so completely that I had hidden every raise and bonus I ever got, telling them I was doing fine, but never letting them see the numbers. I had told myself it was to protect them from worrying. Now I wondered if I had been protecting myself from becoming the person they leaned on the way they had leaned on stories. My mother came back into the kitchen for a glass of water and saw the photo. She picked it up without asking. Her face changed for a second, something tight passing through her expression before she smoothed it away. "Where did you find this?" "In the box by the fire pit," I said. Grandma wrote something on the back. She read the note quickly, then set the photo down like it had burned her fingers. "Your grandmother liked to be dramatic sometimes. It doesn't mean anything now." But it did. I could see it in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. The controlled family story The one where they had sacrificed everything, and I owed them my success in return, was starting to show cracks too. And Victor, with his leaked email and his smooth threats, was standing right in the middle of both stories, using whatever pieces he could reach. Later that night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I sat on the narrow bed in the small back bedroom and opened the screenshots Maya had sent. The full thread was worse than I expected. Victor hadn't just received the old email. He had replied to Rachel asking if there was more context on my family situation and whether it might affect my long-term reliability. Rachel had answered that she would keep an eye on things and suggested they document any future requests for time off. It was all polite corporate language, but the meaning was clear. They were building a file, and they were using the one honest thing I had ever said to HR as the foundation. I saved everything to a private folder on my phone and added my own notes dates and times of the extra work I had done for Victor, without credit, the projects he had claimed as his own in meetings, the way he had started scheduling late calls on weekends, the moment he sensed I was pulling back. If he wanted to control the narrative, I could build one of my own. The difference was, I had no intention of leaking it to anyone. I was going to keep it quiet until I needed it. My phone lit up with a new text from Victor himself. "We need to talk about the Henderson file first thing Monday, and about that old thread. Some conversations are better had in person before they become bigger issues. Enjoy the rest of your weekend." I read it twice. The threat was soft, wrapped in the same generous tone he used when he asked me to stay late. He was reminding me that my escape was temporary and that he still held the pieces he had collected. I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the text and the screenshots to Maya with one line, "If anything happens Monday, you have the full picture." I turned the phone face down and lay back on the thin pillow. Outside the window, the lake was black and still. Inside the cabin, my family slept carrying their own edited stories. Victor thought he had me cornered with an old email and the weight of every favor I had ever done him. What he didn't know was that I had already started keeping my own record the same way I had kept the photograph in my pocket. The controlled story was cracking on both sides now. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I wanted to be the one who stayed quiet to hold it together. I stayed in that narrow bed for a long time after the messages stopped the old photograph resting on the nightstand beside me. The note on the back felt heavier than paper should. My grandmother had known something the rest of us had agreed to forget or rewrite. The family story I had grown up inside, the one about starting from nothing and sacrificing everything, had been edited. There had been money once, an insurance payout, or a small inheritance that had been spent or lost in ways no one wanted to name out loud. My parents had built a cleaner version of the past, so they could keep asking for more from the future without ever having to explain what went wrong. I had hidden my own raises and promotions for the same reason. I had not wanted to become the person they turned to when the edited story stopped being enough. The next morning, the cabin felt smaller. My mother made coffee without asking if I wanted any. My father sat on the porch with the newspaper he never finished. Brooke kept glancing at her phone like she was waiting for someone to tell her how to feel. Only Tyler moved around the kitchen like nothing had shifted, making eggs and toast for whoever wanted them. I ate at the counter and let the quiet sit. Victor sent one more text around 10, a short demand that I join a call that afternoon to align on priorities before Monday. He didn't mention the email thread this time. He didn't have to. The reminder was already there. I told my family I needed to handle something for work and stepped out onto the porch with my laptop. The call was short and one-sided. Victor spoke in that same smooth tone he had used on the speaker the day before, listing tasks that were clearly his responsibility and framing them as things only I could fix because I knew the details. When I stayed quiet, he added almost casually, "We should probably talk about that old thread, too. Rachel thinks it shows a pattern." I told her I'd handle it directly with you. No need to make it bigger than it is. I let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds before I answered. I've been documenting the extra work I've done for you over the last 18 months. Every late night, every presentation I rewrote, every time I covered a deadline you missed. I also have the full email thread Rachel forwarded and the screenshots of our conversation yesterday. If you want to discuss patterns, we can do it with the full record in front of us. He laughed once the sound short and surprised. Olivia, that's not how this works. You're making this personal. It became personal the moment you used a private email to pressure me in front of my family, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm not asking for anything dramatic. I'm telling you the record exists. On Monday, I'm going to HR with it. You can decide how you want that conversation to go. I ended the call before he could answer. My hands were steady when I closed the laptop, but something inside my chest had started to shake. I walked down to the water's edge and let the cold air hit my face. For the first time in years, I had said no without softening it, without offering to stay late to make up for the boundary. The generosity I had given so freely had been turned into a weapon against me. Now, the same habit of keeping records, of noticing every detail, was becoming the thing that might set me free. Back inside the cabin, my mother was sitting at the small table with the old photograph in front of her. She looked up when I came in. Your grandmother wrote that note after your grandfather died, she said quietly. There was money. Not a lot, but enough that we could have made different choices. We spent it trying to keep things looking the same. We never told you because we didn't want you to think we had failed you. I sat across from her. The hurt was still there, sharp and familiar, but it didn't feel like the only thing in the room anymore. I hid my promotions for the same reason, I told her. I didn't want to become the person you asked to fix things. I thought disappearing a little would keep everyone comfortable. My father came in from the porch and stood in the doorway. Brooke stayed in the living room but didn't turn the TV up. Tyler kept washing dishes like he was giving us the space to finish what we had started. My mother nodded slowly, like she was accepting something she had known for a long time. We made you disappear in the stories we told, she said. I'm sorry for that. It wasn't a full apology and it didn't erase the years, but it was the first honest sentence any of us had spoken about it in this cabin. I didn't push for more. I just let the quiet sit between us until it felt like something we could carry instead of something that carried us. That evening, I sent one more message to Victor, copied to Maya, and to the HR director above Rachel. It was short and factual, the list of documented extra work, the timeline of the leaked thread, and a single sentence stating that I would no longer be available for weekend or after-hours communication unless it was a true emergency approved in advance. I didn't threaten. I didn't explain. I simply closed the loop he had tried to keep open. Monday morning, I drove back to the city alone. The cabin felt smaller in the rearview mirror, but the weight I had carried for years felt lighter. Victor tried to schedule a meeting first thing. I declined and went straight to the HR director's office with the folder I had built. She read through it without interrupting. When she finished, she asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint. I told her I wanted the pattern to stop and that I was willing to stay if the pattern stopped. She nodded once and said she would handle it. By Wednesday, Victor was moved to a different team with a note in his file about management concerns. Rachel received a written warning for sharing confidential employee communications. I was offered his old role with a raise that matched the work I had already been doing. I accepted without fanfare. The power I had reclaimed didn't need an audience. It only needed to be mine. That Friday, I drove back to the cabin for one more night. My mother had left the old photograph on the kitchen table with a new note underneath it in her own handwriting. We can tell the real story now if you want. I didn't answer right away. I sat on the porch with Tyler while he split more wood and let the sound of the lake fill the spaces where old stories used to live. My sister Brooke came out later and sat beside me without speaking. My father brought coffee. None of us tried to fix the past in one evening. We just sat with the version that was finally allowed to exist. Later, alone, on the same narrow bed where I had made the decision to stop disappearing, I let myself cry for the first time in months. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet release of someone who had finally put down a weight she had been carrying so long, she had forgotten what her shoulders felt like without it. When the tears stopped, I washed my face, packed my bag, and drove home in the early light with the windows down. The city skyline looked the same, but the woman driving toward it was no longer willing to vanish inside someone else's version of her life. Victor still works at the firm on a different floor with less authority and a permanent note in his file. Rachel no longer handles my paperwork. My family still calls, still asks for things sometimes, but the questions come with less pressure now that the edited stories have been set aside. I answer when I can and say no when I need to, the same way I learned to do with my own record. The generosity I once offered without limits now has edges. It has conditions. It has me at the center of it instead of everyone else. I kept the old photograph in my desk drawer at the new office. Sometimes I take it out and read both notes, my grandmother's and my mother's, and remember that real family doesn't require you to disappear so the story stays comfortable. It lets you exist even when the truth is messy. I don't need the cabin to feel that anymore. I carry it with me in the quiet way I now protect my time, my boundaries, and the record I refuse to let anyone else write for me. Thank you for listening to my story. If this helped you see something in your own life a little more clearly, comment "healing" below. I read every comment, and I'm grateful you're here.